What happens when the fairy tale shatters? For Charlotte Hayes. 7 months pregnant and married to a millionaire. It happened in the middle of a Michelin star restaurant. Her husband, Sebastian Croft, didn't just walk out on their marriage. He walked out on the bill, leaving her humiliated and holding a 4-figure check. He thought he could break her, discard her like one of his disposable assets. But he made one catastrophic miscalculation. He forgot who his mother was. Before the sun rose the next day, it wasn't a lawyer Charlotte called. It was the one woman Sebastian never expected his own mother. And she wasn't offering condolences. She was ready to file charges. This is the story of how a mother's love for justice outweighed her love for her son. The weight of the crystal water glass felt heavier than usual in Charlotte Hayes' hand. Its meticulously etched surface, cool against her skin, was a small solid thing in a world that had begun to feel terrifyingly fluid. Across the starched white linen of the table at Aurelia, one of New York's most obscenely expensive restaurants, her husband, Sebastian Croft, smiled. It was the smile he used for magazine covers and fawning investors. A brilliant predatory flash of white that never quite reached his steel blue eyes. To us, he said, raising his own glass of what was likely a $900 bottle of Bordeaux. And to new beginnings. Charlotte, 7 months pregnant, mirrored the gesture with her water. New beginnings, she echoed the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. She tried to locate the man she had fallen in love with in the chiseled, impassive face opposite her. 3 years ago, he was the charismatic tech mogul who had swept her off her feet, a whirlwind of helicopter dates, private gallery viewings, and a genuine infectious laugh that seemed to fill every room. She, an up-and-coming interior designer, had been captivated not by his wealth, but by his apparent passion for life, for building things for her. Now the passion was gone, replaced by a chillingly precise form of control. It had been a slow erosion. First came the comments about her friends, whom he deemed unambitious. Then came the suggestions about her career, which he felt was a cute hobby that distracted from her real responsibilities as Mrs. Sebastian Croft. Soon her credit cards were replaced with a single joint account card that sent an itemized alert to his phone with every purchase. He called it financial transparency. She knew it was a leash. The pregnancy had been her last desperate hope. A baby she had thought would surely reawaken the man she loved. It would give them a shared purpose, a bond that his burgeoning empire couldn't sever. For a while it seemed to work. He'd been attentive, even tender placing a hand on her growing belly and whispering plans for the nursery in their cavernous Fifth Avenue penthouse. But in the last month, a new coldness had set in, more profound than ever before. He'd become distant, his nights spent at the office growing more frequent. Whispers from the tightly knit circle of the city's elite had reached her whispers of a new protégé at his company, a sharp-tongued, raven-haired woman named Cassandra Thorne. Sebastian had dismissed it as corporate jealousy. Tonight was supposed to be the reset. He had announced it this morning, his voice smooth and final. "We need a proper date night, Lottie. Just you and me. We'll go to Aurelia. We need to talk." And so they talked. Or rather, he did. He spoke of market projections of a new acquisition of his own brilliance. He barely asked about the baby, a fact that sent a sliver of ice through Charlotte's veins. She ate her seared scallops in near silence, the baby kicking against her ribs as if sensing its mother's distress. "You've been quiet tonight," Sebastian finally observed, dabbing his lips with a napkin. He leaned forward, the smile fading, replaced by a look of cold assessment. "Are you feeling unwell?" "I'm fine, Sebastian. Just thinking." About what? The question was. Sharp an interrogation. Charlotte took a deep breath, deciding to finally voice the fear that had been strangling her for weeks. About us. About what you meant by new beginnings. I was hoping it meant, a renewed focus on our family. On the baby. Sebastian leaned back, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He swirled the wine in his glass, watching the crimson liquid cling to the sides. The baby, of course. The Croft heir. That's a very important role. He looked at her, but his gaze was distant, as if she were a line item on a balance sheet. But a child doesn't fix foundational issues, Charlotte. You know that. What foundational issues? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Your discontentment. Your unhappiness, he said, framing it as her failing. A man in my position needs a partner, not a liability. He needs someone who adds value, who understands the mission. Lately, I feel like I'm managing two enterprises, my company and your emotions. Each word was a perfectly polished stone thrown with devastating accuracy. He was making this her fault. The loneliness, the isolation, the fear. It was all her discontentment. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she fought them back fiercely. She would not cry in front of him. I am not a liability, Sebastian. I am your wife, and I am carrying your child. He sighed, a theatrical display of exhaustion. And I've provided for you, lavishly. You live in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. You wear clothes that cost more than most people's cars. You wanted for nothing. I wanted you. The words burst out louder than she intended, causing a nearby table to glance over. She lowered her voice, a hot wave of shame washing over her. I wanted a husband, not a benefactor. Sebastian's face hardened into a mask of utter indifference. This was it. This was the moment the axe fell. That unfortunately is a commodity I'm no longer able to provide, he said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. He reached into his jacket and pulled out not his wallet, but a single crisp envelope. He slid it across the table. It was thick, heavy with legal documents. What is this? Charlotte whispered, her hand hovering over it, afraid to touch it. That's my version of a new beginning, he said. It's a separation agreement. A very, very generous one, I might add. It contains the keys to a new apartment, a very nice one, fully furnished, and the details of a trust for the child. You'll be well taken care of, provided you sign it. No fuss, no lawyers, no mess. The world tilted. The distant chatter of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. He was divorcing her. Here. Now. You're leaving me. I'm giving you an exit ramp, Charlotte, he corrected. A clean break. This marriage was a mistake, a miscalculation on my part. I'm correcting it. He stood up, straightening his bespoke suit jacket. He looked down at her, his pregnant wife, with the detached pity one might show a stray dog. The bill is on its way. Consider it a final severance package, he said, his lips twisting into that horrific smile again. I've already moved my personal effects from the penthouse. My driver is waiting. Don't try to contact me. My lawyer will be in touch if you unwisely choose to contest this. And then he turned and walked away. He didn't look back. He strode through the restaurant, nodding to an acquaintance at the bar, and disappeared through the heavy oak doors, leaving Charlotte alone at the table, the unsigned divorce papers sitting between a half-eaten plate of lamb and a monumentally expensive bottle of wine. A few moments later, the waiter, a young man with kind, nervous eyes, approached the table. He held a small, leather-bound bill folder. "Ma'am," he began, his voice hesitant as he took in the empty chair and the woman's shell-shocked expression. He placed the folder on the table. "Your check whenever you're ready." Charlotte stared at it. She knew Sebastian. She knew his taste, his need to always order the most expensive, the most exclusive. She slowly opened the folder. The number at the bottom seemed to leap off the page, a cruel 4-digit punchline to a joke she never understood. 2,145,17. And she was alone, pregnant with a dead-end credit card and a broken heart. Humiliation is a uniquely potent poison. It doesn't just wound, it paralyzes. For a full 5 minutes, Charlotte sat frozen, the open bill folder, a testament to her public execution. The murmur of the restaurant, once a sophisticated backdrop, now felt like a chorus of whispers directed at her. The abandoned wife. The fool. The woman who couldn't even keep her millionaire husband. The kind-eyed waiter, whose name tag read Leo, hovered nearby, a study in professional anxiety. He knew something was terribly wrong. Charlotte could feel his pity, and it was like salt in an open wound. She had to move. She had to do something. Her mind raced frantically, searching for a solution. The joint credit card Sebastian had given her was a trap. He would see the charge instantly, and it would become another piece of ammunition for his lawyers. "See, she's still trying to spend my money." Her personal debit card, linked to an account she'd kept from her old life, held less than $300, a pathetic sum in this new world she inhabited. Then she remembered. Tucked away in a small, forgotten clutch in the back of her closet was her runaway card. It was a credit card she'd opened herself a year ago, in her own name, using the small, sporadic income from a few freelance design projects she'd taken on against Sebastian's wishes. She had kept it a secret, a tiny act of rebellion, a lifeline she prayed she would never need. The limit was only 5,000, but tonight it might as well be 1,000,000. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and dialed for a taxi, her voice a strained whisper. Then she flagged down Leo. I'll take care of this now." She managed her voice steadier than she felt. She slid the secret card out of her wallet, shielding its name with her thumb. Leo took it, his relief palpable. "Of course, ma'am." He hurried away, leaving her alone once more with the damning envelope on the table. She couldn't bring herself to open it fully, but she could see the letterhead of a notoriously ruthless divorce attorney, Arthur Vance. She shoved the entire envelope into her oversized handbag, the paper feeling toxic to the touch. The walk out of Aurelia was the longest of her life. She kept her head held high, her eyes fixed on the exit, refusing to meet the curious gazes that followed her. The cool night air hit her like a slap, a welcome shock to her system. Her taxi was waiting. As she slid into the back seat, the weight of what had just happened finally crashed down on her. The drive back to the Fifth Avenue penthouse was a blur of streetlights and tears she could no longer hold back. Sobs racked her body, silent, agonizing spasms of grief and terror. The baby kicked a frantic, insistent rhythm against her ribs, as if trying to comfort or escape. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, her hand protectively on her stomach. "I've got you. I've got you." It was a promise she had no idea how she would keep. The doorman, a kind elderly man named Patrick, who always had a smile for her, greeted her with a concerned look. "Mrs. Croft. Is everything all right?" Mr. Croft's driver picked him up hours ago. He seemed in a hurry. "I'm fine, Patrick. Just a long night," she lied, forcing a weak smile. The elevator ride up to the penthouse felt like an ascent to a tomb. The doors opened onto their private foyer, and the silence was immediate and absolute. It was a dead silence, the kind that follows a storm. She stepped inside. The first thing she noticed was the empty space on the wall where a large, abstract painting he'd loved had hung. Then she saw the gaps on the bookshelves, the missing silver cigar box on the coffee table. She walked numbly through the sprawling apartment. In their shared closet, his side was bare. The racks of custom suits, the neat rows of Italian leather shoes, all gone. On his side of the bed, the nightstand was empty. Even his charging cables were gone. The efficiency of it all was the cruelest part. This wasn't a spontaneous act of anger. This was a meticulously planned operation. He had been packing his bags while she was picking out a dress for their date night. He had been orchestrating her public humiliation while she naively hoped for a reconciliation. The anger came then hot and clarifying, burning through the shock and grief. He hadn't just left her. He had tried to annihilate her. He wanted her to feel small, helpless, and utterly dependent on the generous crumbs he'd offered in that envelope. He expected her to crumble to take the deal and to disappear quietly. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress still holding the faint scent of his cologne, a ghost in their shared space. Panic began to set in again. What was she going to do? Her family was in Ohio, a world away. Calling them would mean admitting the spectacular failure of her marriage, worrying her retired parents sick. Her friends, the few he hadn't managed to push away, would be sympathetic, but they couldn't possibly understand the scale of the battle she was facing. She was up against Sebastian Croft, a man who treated business and life like a war of attrition, a man who had limitless resources and zero scruples. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over her mother's number. She couldn't do it. Not yet. She needed a plan. She needed leverage. She needed a miracle. Her eyes scanned the contacts list, a graveyard of forgotten friendships and society acquaintances. Then she saw a name she hadn't called in over a year, a name she was almost afraid to dial. Margaret Croft, Sebastian's mother. Her relationship with Margaret was complex and distant. Margaret was old money, a matriarch from a world of quiet inherited power that looked down on Sebastian's brash new money tactics. She was a woman of formidable composure and icy civility. She had never been overtly unkind to Charlotte, but there was always a sense of observation of judgment held in reserve. Margaret saw Charlotte. Charlotte suspected as just another one of Sebastian's acquisitions, prettier and with better manners than most, but an acquisition nonetheless. Calling her was a monumental risk. Margaret was fiercely loyal to the family name. She would likely side with her son, admonishing Charlotte for her part in the marriage's failure and advising her to take the deal and avoid a public scandal. It was the logical, pragmatic Croft thing to do. But as Charlotte sat there in the ruins of her life, a different memory of Margaret surfaced. It was from a family dinner about a year ago. Sebastian had been belittling Charlotte's design work, making a joke about her little hobby. Charlotte had simply gone quiet, as she'd learned to do. But across the table she had seen it a brief, sharp flash of disapproval in Margaret's eyes, a tightening of her jaw. It was gone in an instant, but Charlotte had seen it. Margaret hadn't defended her, but she had noticed, and she had not approved of her son's cruelty. It was a long shot, a desperate, wild gamble, but it was the only one she had. Her fingers shaking, she pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. She was about to hang up her courage, failing when a calm, clipped voice answered. Charlotte. It's past midnight. Is everything all right? Charlotte opened her mouth, but all that came out was a choked sob. There was a pause on the other end of the line, not of impatience, but of careful listening. Where are you? Margaret asked, her tone shifting from surprise to something more serious, more focused. The penthouse, Charlotte managed to say. Is Sebastian there? No. He left me. At the restaurant. He left me with the bill and divorce papers. The entire ugly story tumbled out in a rush of broken sentences. Another pause. Longer this time. Charlotte held her breath, expecting the cold dismissal the lecture. But when Margaret Croft spoke again, her voice was like ice. Not the ice of indifference, but the ice of a gathering storm. He did what the question hung in the air, sharp and brittle. It wasn't accusatory. It was clarifying. Margaret Croft was gathering facts, her mind working with the cold precision of a general assessing a battlefield. Tell me everything, Charlotte. Margaret commanded, her voice devoid of pity, but laced with an unnerving intensity. Start with the restaurant. What did he say? What exactly was in the envelope? Stammering at first, then with growing clarity, Charlotte recounted the entire evening. The condescending monologue, the pronouncements of her being a liability, the theatrical reveal of the separation agreement, and the final brutal act of leaving her with a nearly $3,000 bill. She explained how she'd paid with her secret credit card, the lonely taxi ride, and the shock of the empty closets. As she spoke, she could hear the faint scratching of a pen on the other end of the line. Margaret was taking notes. The lawyer. Margaret interrupted. Was it Arthur Vance? Yes, Charlotte whispered, stunned. How did you know? A dry, mirthless chuckle came down the line. Because Arthur is a shark who specializes in asset concealment for philandering husbands. Sebastian has had him on a retainer for the last 6 months. I make it my business to know these things. 6 months. The betrayal went deeper than Charlotte could have ever imagined. He'd been planning this for half a year, all while he was talking about nursery colors and holding her hand at sonograms. The thought made her physically ill. He thinks you'll be intimidated. Margaret continued, her voice hardening. He thinks you'll roll over and sign whatever he puts in front of you to avoid a fight. He has gravely underestimated you. And as it turns out, he has gravely underestimated me. There was a beat of silence before Margaret delivered the words that would change everything. Stay where you are. Don't touch that envelope again. Don't answer any calls or messages from him or anyone associated with him. I'll be there in 45 minutes. The line went dead. Charlotte sat in the silent penthouse, her mind reeling. She had expected a lecture, perhaps a bit of chilly advice. She had not expected a call to arms. The next 45 minutes were a blur of nervous energy. She walked from room to room, the opulent spaces now feeling like a movie set for a life that was no longer hers. She made a cup of herbal tea, her hands shaking so badly that hot water sloshed over the sides of the mug. True to her word, precisely 43 minutes later, the private elevator chimed. The doors opened to reveal Margaret Croft. She was not dressed for a late-night emergency visit. She was immaculate in a charcoal grey cashmere coat, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, a structured leather briefcase in one hand. She looked less like a concerned mother-in-law and more like a CEO arriving for a hostile takeover. She swept into the apartment, her sharp eyes taking in the empty spaces on the walls, the bare closets, the single teacup on the marble island. Her gaze finally landed on Charlotte, and for the first time, Charlotte saw a flicker of something beyond steel, a deep, weary sadness. "He has his father's worst instincts," Margaret said, her voice quiet. It wasn't an apology, but a statement of fact. All of the ruthlessness, none of the charm that made it palatable. She walked over to Charlotte, and to Charlotte's utter astonishment, placed a cool, dry hand on her arm. The touch was brief, but it was a gesture of solidarity. "Let me be clear," Margaret said, her voice regaining its commanding tone. "My son has brought shame upon the Croft name. This isn't just an attack on you. It is an attack on the legacy I have spent my life preserving. And more importantly, it is an attack on my grandchild. I will not allow it." She gestured toward the sofa. "Sit. We have work to do." Margaret opened her briefcase on the coffee table. It was not filled with tissues and platitudes. It was filled with files, notebooks, and a tablet. She was a woman prepared for war. "First, you will not be signing his absurd agreement," she stated, pulling on a pair of slim reading glasses. "He wants a quiet, clean break, so he can install that little strumpet from his marketing department, Cassandra Thorne. Without any financial inconvenience. We are going to make this the most inconvenient, loud, and financially catastrophic event of his young life." The casual, dismissive way she said Cassandra's name confirmed every fear Charlotte had harbored. Margaret knew. She knew everything. "Sebastian believes his money makes him invincible." Margaret continued, her eyes flashing. "What he fails to understand is that my money, the family's money, which his entire enterprise was built upon, comes with its own power. A power he has forgotten he is subject to." She then laid out a history Charlotte had only ever glimpsed. The initial seed money for Sebastian's tech company hadn't come from venture capitalists, as he so often claimed in interviews. It had come from a trust. Margaret controlled a fund from her side of the family that stretched back to the railroad tycoons of the 19th century. Sebastian was a beneficiary, not the source. "He has access to profits, but I have influence over the principal," Margaret explained. "He has been moving assets, trying to shelter them in shell corporations under the guidance of Mr. Vance. He thinks I'm an old woman who spends her days at garden parties. He has forgotten that I sit on the board of 2 major banks and that I still read every financial report generated by the family office." She pulled out a file. "This is a preliminary report from a private investigator I hired 3 months ago, when I first noticed Sebastian's unusual financial activity and heard the whispers about Miss Thorne." Charlotte stared at her dumbfounded. Margaret had been investigating her own son for 3 months. "I had hoped it was a passing indiscretion," Margaret said, a flicker of pain in her expression. "I hoped he would come to his senses. But leaving you pregnant in such a vile and public manner. This is a declaration of war. He has crossed a line from which there is no return." Margaret's focus was absolute. "Tomorrow morning, we are not calling a divorce lawyer. We are retaining a legal team. My team. And we are not merely filing for divorce. We are filing a multi-pronged complaint. We will petition for an emergency court order to freeze his personal assets, pending a full financial disclosure. We will file for sole physical and legal custody of the child with supervised visitation for him at our discretion. And we will use the incident at the restaurant as the cornerstone of a claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress." She looked directly at Charlotte, her gaze piercing. "But to do this, I need your full cooperation. I need you to be strong. Can you do that?" The question hung in the air. For the first time in months, a spark of hope ignited within Charlotte. It wasn't the weak hope of reconciliation. It was the fierce, burning hope for justice. She was not alone. She had an ally, an unexpected, formidable, and terrifyingly competent one. She straightened her back, meeting Margaret's gaze. The tears were gone, replaced by a cold resolve that mirrored the woman sitting across from her. "Yes," Charlotte said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, I can." Margaret gave a single, sharp nod of approval. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Good. Now about that bill from Aurelia. Did you keep the receipt?" "Yes, it's in my purse." "Excellent," Margaret said, snapping her briefcase shut. "We'll be submitting that as our first exhibit. Let's see how Sebastian's board of directors feels about him abandoning his pregnant wife over a nearly $3,000 dinner bill. We are going to file charges on your behalf, Charlotte, not in a criminal court, but in the court of public opinion and family law, where the sentences are far, far more costly." The next morning, Charlotte woke not in the cold, empty bed of the penthouse, but in a plush guest suite in Margaret Croft's sprawling pre-war apartment on Park Avenue. Sometime after 2 a.m., Margaret had insisted with the quiet authority of a 5-star general that Charlotte could not stay another night in a place that had been turned into a crime scene of emotional carnage. A silent driver had been summoned, and Charlotte, with a small overnight bag, hastily packed with essentials Margaret had provided, was spirited away into the night, waking up to the soft morning light filtering through silk curtains. For a moment Charlotte felt a disorienting sense of peace, then the reality of her situation crashed back in. But this time it was different. The terror was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was shadowed by a new, unfamiliar feeling purpose. By 8 a.m., she was seated in a leather-paneled office that smelled of old books and power. This was not the office of a mere divorce lawyer. This was the inner sanctum of Evelyn Vance, a woman whose name was uttered in hushed, reverent tones in New York's legal circles. She was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that made Margaret Croft seem warm and fuzzy by comparison. And crucially, she was Arthur Vance's older sister and arch-rival, a fact that brought a grim satisfaction to the room. Margaret had made the call at dawn. The meeting was not a consultation, it was a strategy session. "Let's be clear on the objective," Evelyn began, her voice crisp as she perused the notes Margaret had sent ahead. "Sebastian wants a quiet settlement that allows him to maintain his public image and the vast majority of his perceived wealth. Our objective is to deny him that. We will not be quiet, and the settlement will be anything but a token." She looked at Charlotte, her gaze analytical but not unkind. "Charlotte, I know this is difficult. The legal system is a blunt instrument. They will try to portray you as a gold digger, an unstable, emotional woman. You must be prepared for that." "I am," Charlotte said, her voice firm. She had spent the night steeling herself for this. "Good." Evelyn nodded. "Because we have a significant advantage. 2, in fact. The first is the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of his actions. Leaving a pregnant woman humiliated in a public restaurant is not a good look even for a titan of industry. It's primal, it's villainous, and a judge especially, a female judge, will not look kindly upon it. It establishes a pattern of behavior. And the second advantage?" Charlotte asked. Evelyn's lips curved into a thin smile. The second advantage is Margaret. Margaret, who had been listening silently, spoke up. My son has built a house of cards on a foundation of my family's money. He has leveraged assets from the Croft family trust to secure lines of credit for his more speculative ventures. These ventures are not officially part of his marital property. Evelyn and I are about to argue that they are. Evelyn slid a thick document across the mahogany desk to Charlotte. This is our initial filing. It is an emergency petition. We are asking the court for 3 things immediately. First, an ex parte restraining order preventing Sebastian from contacting you, coming near you, or liquidating any marital assets. Second, we are demanding he vacate the Fifth Avenue penthouse as it is marital property, and you, as a vulnerable pregnant woman who has been abandoned, have the greater need. Third, we are filing for temporary spousal and child support that is commensurate not just with his declared income, but with the lifestyle he established for you. Charlotte's eyes widened as she scanned the figures. The amount they were demanding was staggering. It wasn't just for living expenses. It was a strategic blow designed to get his immediate and undivided attention. He will fight this, Charlotte breathed. Of course he will, Evelyn said. And when he does, he will have to submit a full sworn financial affidavit. His brother Arthur will try to hide as much as possible. But they won't be expecting us to have a roadmap to his hidden accounts. That was Margaret's contribution. She opened her briefcase and produced a slim leather-bound ledger. For the last 5 years, I have had an independent accounting firm conduct a quarterly audit of the family trust and its related interests. Sebastian is aware of this, but he believes it's a mere formality. He has no idea that the firm reports directly to me. I know about the Shell Corporation in the Cayman Islands. I know about the art he purchased through a holding company and has stored in a Swiss free port. I know about the consulting fees paid to Cassandra Thorne's personal LLC. It's all here. The room was silent for a moment, as the weight of Margaret's betrayal of her son and her loyalty to justice sank in. This was not just a divorce. It was a meticulously planned demolition. The process will begin now, Evelyn said, picking up her phone. We filed the petition electronically. A process server is already on standby. Sebastian will likely be served at his office this afternoon, in front of as many people as possible. The rest of the day was a blur of activity. Charlotte signed affidavits, answered detailed questions about her marriage, and provided access to every email and text message she had from Sebastian. It was draining, like excavating her own heart for evidence. Margaret stayed by her side, a silent, formidable presence ensuring Charlotte ate, drank water, and stayed focused. Late that afternoon, Margaret's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, a flicker of grim satisfaction in her eyes. It's done, she announced. The server delivered the papers to Sebastian in the middle of a board meeting. Charlotte could almost picture the scene, the hushed boardroom. The confusion, Sebastian's handsome face contorting first in disbelief, then in pure, unadulterated rage as he saw the names on the petition: Charlotte Hayes Croft, ver. Sebastian Croft. And worse, the signature on the supporting affidavit from his primary financial backer, his own mother. The counterattack was immediate. Within the hour, news websites that catered to the tech and finance world began publishing articles. The narrative was clear, spun by a high-priced crisis PR firm. Tech visionary Sebastian Croft victim of acrimonious split, read one headline. The articles painted Charlotte as a demanding, unstable wife whose lavish spending and emotional outbursts had tragically fractured the marriage. They hinted that her pregnancy was a last-ditch effort to trap him. Charlotte felt sick as she read the lies, the cruel twisting of their life into a weapon against her. "Ignore it," Margaret commanded, taking the tablet from Charlotte's hands. "It's predictable. It's also a mistake on his part. He's trying to fight a public battle. We are fighting a legal one. Let him sling mud. We are building a fortress." The true blowback came via a phone call, not to Charlotte, who Sebastian was now legally barred from contacting, but to Margaret. She took the call in her private study. The heavy doors closed. Even so, Charlotte could hear the muffled sound of a man roaring with rage. The call lasted for nearly 20 minutes. When Margaret emerged, her face was pale, but her expression was resolute. "He is displeased," she said with monumental understatement. "He accused me of treason, of trying to ruin him. He threatened to cut me off to ensure I never see my grandchild." "Margaret, I am so sorry." Charlotte began, her heart aching for the woman who was sacrificing her own son for her. Margaret held up a hand, cutting her off. "Do not be sorry. I am not. I told him that he had already made his choice when he left you at that restaurant. I told him that every action has a consequence, and his were about to come due. And I informed him that if he ever wanted to see his child, he would do it on our terms, and that his first step was to fire Arthur Vance and hire an attorney who was interested in a swift and fair settlement." She took a deep, steadying breath. "He has sealed his own fate, Charlotte. Now we simply let the machine we've built do its work. The Croft war machine was fully engaged, and its target was one of its own." The first hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. To Sebastian, it must have felt like an eternity. To Charlotte, it felt like a lifetime crammed into 14 days. The world she had known had vanished, replaced by a strange new reality of legal consultations, strategic planning, and the quiet, gilded sanctuary of Margaret's Park Avenue residence. Sebastian, true to form, did not go quietly. Denied direct contact, he waged his war through proxies and the press. More articles appeared, each one more vicious than the last. Anonymous sources, friends of Sebastian, no doubt spoke of Charlotte's erratic behavior and unreasonable demands. A paparazzi photographer suddenly appeared outside Margaret's building, snapping photos of a visibly pregnant Charlotte getting into a car. The resulting headline was cruel: "The $1 million bump inside Charlotte Croft's pricey divorce demands." The public attacks were painful, but inside the war room of Evelyn Vance's office, they were systematically dismantled and repurposed. "This is a gift," Evelyn said, pointing to the paparazzi photo on a screen. "He's trying to paint you as greedy, but all a judge will see is a pregnant woman being harassed because her husband is a vindictive bully. He's documenting his own campaign of intimidation for us. Keep every article." His financial tactics were just as aggressive. He immediately froze the joint account, a pointless gesture since Charlotte was no longer using it. He sent a formal notice through his lawyer that he would no longer be paying the exorbitant maintenance fees on the Fifth Avenue penthouse, a move designed to force a sale. Evelyn and Margaret countered every thrust with a skillful parry. To the notice about the penthouse fees, Evelyn's office responded coolly that they were pleased he was vacating the marital home as per their petition, and that he could forward all future bills to their office, as they would be covered by the emergency support they were demanding. They filed a motion to have his PR firm's invoices submitted as part of his personal expenditures, arguing that he was using marital funds to defame his wife. The true masterstroke, however, came from Margaret. She had her banking connections place a compliance review on the lines of credit tied to the Croft family trust. It was a bureaucratic move, perfectly legal, that had the immediate effect of freezing Sebastian's access to a huge pool of his operating capital. It was like cutting a main supply line to an army. Suddenly, his ability to wage an infinitely funded legal war was severely hampered. He was forced to fight with only the money he had managed to squirrel away, not the vast fortune he had always taken for granted. The day of the hearing arrived a cold grey morning. Charlotte dressed carefully, choosing a simple, elegant maternity dress in a deep navy blue. She was not a victim. She was a mother, fighting for her child's future. Margaret stood beside her, a pillar of strength in Chanel tweed. The courtroom was a small, sterile chamber. Sebastian was already there, standing with his brother Arthur. He looked haggard. The easy arrogance was gone, replaced by a tense, simmering fury. When his eyes met Charlotte's, she saw pure hatred, and it made her flinch. But then she felt Margaret's hand on her elbow, a small, grounding pressure, and she held his gaze without wavering. The hearing was a brutal, clinical affair. Arthur Vance, slick and overconfident, argued that the restraining order was an overreach, that Sebastian had been planning an amicable separation, and that Charlotte's demands were a form of extortion. He painted Sebastian as a generous husband, shocked by his wife's sudden greed. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She was calm, methodical, and devastating. She didn't raise her voice. She simply presented facts. "Your Honor," she began, "we are here because Mr. Croft, a man with a net worth in the hundreds of millions, decided the most appropriate way to end his marriage was to abandon his 7 months pregnant wife in a restaurant, leaving her to pay a bill of $2,845.17. She held up a copy of the receipt. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, peered at it over her glasses. Evelyn continued, her voice even. He did this after ensuring his closets were empty, and a punitive separation agreement was in her hands. He then orchestrated a press campaign to defame her. These are not the actions of a man seeking an amicable split. These are the actions of a bully attempting to coerce a vulnerable woman into submission. She then presented the preliminary evidence of the hidden assets, the shell corporations, the payments to Cassandra Thorne's LLC. With every document she produced, Arthur Vance's face grew paler, and Sebastian's jaw tightened. The judge listened, her expression unreadable. She asked a few pointed questions of Arthur, focusing on the timing of the asset movements. His answers were evasive and unconvincing. Finally, the judge looked at Sebastian directly. "Mr. Croft, do you have anything you wish to say about the incident at the Aurelia restaurant?" Sebastian stood, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "It was a private dinner, a misunderstanding. My wife is being overly emotional." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Overly emotional. It seems to me that being left alone pregnant with a nearly $3,000 bill is a situation that might provoke some emotion in even the most stoic individual." She then delivered her ruling. The restraining order was granted. The motion for Sebastian to vacate the penthouse was granted, and the request for temporary support was granted at a figure even higher than Evelyn had requested, with the judge citing Mr. Croft's bad faith actions and attempts to intimidate the petitioner. It was a total, unequivocal victory. Arthur Vance looked stunned. Sebastian looked as if he had been physically struck. As the judge adjourned, he turned his face a mask of fury and took a step towards the opposing table. "You," he hissed, his voice low and venomous, directed not at Charlotte, but at his mother. "You did this. You traitorous old witch. You will regret this." Court officers immediately moved towards him, but Margaret did not flinch. She met her son's gaze. her own eyes filled with a chilling mixture of pity and resolve. "No, Sebastian," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the quiet room. "You did this to yourself. I am simply holding you accountable." The confrontation was the breaking point. That evening, a shaken Arthur Vance called Evelyn Vance. The war was over. Sebastian wanted to settle. The negotiations were swift and brutal. With Margaret's ledger as their guide, there was nowhere for Sebastian to hide his money. His attempts to undervalue his company were met with the threat of a full forensic audit, which would expose his financial maneuverings to his investors and board. The final reckoning came a week later in Evelyn's conference room. Sebastian sat on one side of a vast table, a new chastened lawyer beside him. He looked defeated. His empire was intact, but his invincibility was shattered. He had been outmaneuvered, outgunned, and brought to heel by the two women he had underestimated the most. Charlotte was granted the penthouse outright. A multi-million-dollar trust was established for the baby, untouchable by either parent until the child turned 25. She received a lifetime alimony settlement that guaranteed her financial independence forever. The terms were ironclad. When it was over, Sebastian signed the papers without a word. He stood refused to look at Charlotte or his mother, and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him, the final sound of a chapter of her life closing for good. In the silence, Charlotte looked at Margaret, tears welling in her eyes, not of sadness, but of profound, overwhelming gratitude. Margaret simply reached across the table and squeezed her hand. The alliance forged in a moment of crisis had held. The war was won. Freedom, Charlotte discovered, had a scent. It smelled like the fresh paint in her new apartment, a sun-drenched space in the West Village that she had picked out herself. It smelled like the lemon and lavender cleaning products she used, replacing the sterile chemical scent of the penthouse's cleaning service. Most of all, it smelled like the sweet, powdery aroma of baby lotion and new beginnings. 6 weeks after the settlement was signed, Charlotte gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Grace, not after a family member, but for the virtue she had fought so hard to reclaim for herself. The penthouse, that monument to a life that had almost crushed her, was sold. Charlotte had no desire to live in a gilded cage, no matter how beautiful. With a portion of the proceeds and the security of the settlement, she purchased the West Village apartment and invested the rest under the guidance of a financial advisor, recommended by to no one's surprise Margaret. Her relationship with her former mother-in-law had evolved into something quiet and profound. The formalities were gone, replaced by a bond forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. Margaret was a frequent visitor, arriving not with the stiff obligation of a society matriarch, but with the genuine warmth of a doting grandmother. She would sit for hours, holding baby Grace, her steely composure melting away as she whispered stories and sang old lullabies. She never spoke of Sebastian. It was an unspoken agreement. His name was a ghost they had both exorcised from their lives. Charlotte heard through the grapevine that he had in fact married Cassandra Thorne in a quiet, unpublicized ceremony. His company had taken a significant reputational hit from the rumors surrounding the divorce, and several key investors had pulled out. He was still a wealthy man, but his meteoric rise had been checked. He had learned the hard way that some foundations are not meant to be broken. One sunny afternoon, as Charlotte was rocking Grace in the nursery, she had designed a room of soft creams, gentle greens, and whimsical watercolor animals. Margaret watched them from the doorway. "You've built a beautiful life here, Charlotte," she said, her voice softer than Charlotte had ever heard it. "We built it," Charlotte corrected, looking up at her. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Margaret. You saved me." Margaret walked into the room and placed a hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "You saved yourself, my dear. You had the courage to make that first call. You had the strength to stand up and fight. I simply provided the ammunition. Never forget that." Looking down at her daughter, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms, Charlotte knew Margaret was right. The naive girl who had been so captivated by a billionaire's charm was gone forever. In her place was a woman, a mother who understood her own worth. She had been left alone at a table intended to be a footnote in a powerful man's story, but she had refused to be a victim. With the help of an unlikely ally, she had picked up a pen and written her own ending. The city hummed outside her window, a symphony of endless possibility. Her life was no longer about glittering parties or designer labels. It was about the simple, solid weight of her daughter in her arms, the warmth of the sun on her face, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she was finally truly in control of her own destiny. She was home. That's the incredible story of Charlotte Hayes Croft. A woman who turned a moment of profound humiliation into a declaration of independence. It's a powerful reminder that strength isn't about the absence of fear, but about acting in spite of it. Sebastian thought his money made him invincible, but he forgot that true power lies in integrity, courage, and the unbreakable bonds between women who refuse to be silenced. Charlotte and Margaret's story shows us that sometimes the most powerful ally you can have is the one you least expect. What did you think of Margaret's decision to side with her daughter-in-law against her own son? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true life stories of justice and empowerment. Thank you for listening.